I'm guessing that most of you have heard of the concept of counting sheep to fall asleep. So what we offer you now is a pattern that's basically a souped-up version of counting sheep, something that will completely distract your mind from the problem that's keeping you awake. This is called the butterfly effect pattern. It originates from an offshoot of the chaos theory, which states that a small change at one point in a nonlinear system can have a very large or dramatic effect at a later time. In other words, a very small event happening at point A can cause a chain reaction of events that results in a very dramatic change at point B. This was named the butterfly effect by mathematician and meteorologist Edward Lorenz, who described the flapping of a butterfly's wings eventually causing a hurricane. So to use this pattern, the butterfly effect pattern, we simply create our own chain reaction of events in our minds and let it run its course as far as possible. Then eventually, as we're running this chain of events through our minds, we'll drift off and fall asleep in the middle of it. Let's give this a try. I'll use one of my own personal examples as we go through the steps to show you how this pattern works. Step 1. Select an image. This is where you need to imagine a random event happening, and it can be anything you want. For example, you might imagine seeing a nail sitting on the sidewalk, and you walk by and you pick it up. This act of picking up the nail was the first event. It was the butterfly's wings flapping. Now we move on to step 2, start the chain. So now you begin the chain reaction by imagining how that random event from step 1 might affect something else down the line. For example, maybe a man is riding by later that day on his bike and the nail would have punctured his tire, but you saved him that trouble by picking up the nail. Now we move on to step 3, follow the chain. So now you just let the chain reaction keep happening in your mind. Let it unfold, be creative, whatever comes to mind. So for example, let's keep going with the nail example. Maybe the man would have missed his son's baseball game if he was delayed with that flat tire, but he made it because you picked up the nail. And finally, step 4 is to just let it go. Let it get as ridiculous as it needs to be, but just keep the chain reaction going. So continuing with our example, maybe the man's wife was fed up with all of his bike riding, and if he would have missed the game, it would have been the beginning of the end for his marriage. But instead, the man and the woman reconnected watching their son's baseball game. A divorce would have sent the boy down a rebellious path, and he would have dropped out of school. Instead, the boy goes on to be the valedictorian, and then he becomes a doctor, and he creates a miracle cure for whatever, and it just keeps going and going and going. And remember, you caused all of this by picking up a simple nail. You can see how this chain reaction thought process can take on a life of its own. Hopefully, if this pattern works for you, you'll wake up the next morning and not remember where you left off in your chain reaction.